Time now for our first session of the day, the Sports and Gambling session. I'm Jamie Wheaton, a Senior Research Associate at the Hub and the University of Bristol. It's a great privilege for me to be chairing this session on sports and gambling, which I'm sure will provide us with a lot of food for thought, both for the subject area and also for the sessions which follow today. So for the next hour, we have four great speakers, and we'll have a chance for a Q&A at the end once everyone has finished speaking. So please do keep any questions you have in mind for the roving mic or on Slido, whether you're joining us here in person or online as well. But for now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker for the session, Professor Simon Chadwick, founder of the Future Sport Forum, who's going to be talking about a wolf in sheep's clothing, understanding why and how sports sponsorship programs contribute to gambling problems. Simon, thank you.
Do I click? Okay. So thank you everyone for being here, and hopefully I won't bore you for too long. Thanks also to the Bristol team for inviting me to be part of not just of today, but of the work in general that they're doing. If I could pick up on a couple of things that firstly Brianne said. I don't know where, so Brianne, you're still here. One of the things that I do a lot is to focus my attention on the Gulf region. Sport in the Gulf region, as many of you will probably know, is very important right now, but we even have Saudi Arabia and Dubai that are currently contemplating the deregulation of gambling markets. So we may actually see casinos in the desert and online gaming, online gambling and so forth in the Gulf region. I also listened to Agnes's introduction, and the word complex jumped out at me. So my presentation today is I guess in one way, is about complexity, because we all know this. We all see this. We see it every week. And just to give you a sense, the Premier League is broadcast in 204 territories globally. And so this name and lots of other names are reaching audiences 24/7, 365. Now, for those of you who are not from a sponsorship background or a football background, for this kind of deal, it could be as little as, say, £5 million per season. Now, for me, that's good value for money. You pay £5 million and people all over the world, all day, every day, see your name. But there is a complex story behind all of this. So what I'm going to do is today's going to be a little bit of a sponsorship 101. So for the people who study sponsorship or work in sponsorship, I apologize. I don't mean to patronize you. For those who don't have experience of sponsorship in the sponsorship industry, hopefully this will give you a little bit of insight about how things work. But keep that word in mind, complex. In terms of who I am and what I do, my PhD was on football shirt sponsorship. It wasn't an excuse to watch lots and lots of football. Football. The one name that I would pick out of everyone who's on there is UEFA. So this summer I was working with UEFA, and what was really interesting about UEFA at the Euros this summer is that for the first time UEFA had an official tournament gambling partner, Betano. And so I know what UEFA was thinking about because I work with UEFA's sponsorship and marketing team. And so I know why they signed the deal. So hopefully I'm not just bringing academic insights. I'm essentially an academic, but I work with companies in the industry. I also point out the penultimate point there, which is assisted agencies or assisting agencies such as HK, Weber Shandwick, Engine. There is an industrial ecosystem. And that's really important to stress, an industrial ecosystem that underpins sponsorship. So it's not just a name on a shirt. There is a hinterland there that is complex, diverse, and the other word that Agnes mentioned, global. Now, this is the definition of sponsorship, and I deliberately chose this particular definition of sponsorship because this is a definition of sponsorship provided by a company called Sport5. You probably don't know Sport5. Sport5 is a German agency, and Sport5 sells sponsorships or buys sponsorship opportunities on behalf of clients. So you could be Betway or Betano or Betfair or Ladbrokes or whoever else, and you go to Sport5 and you say, find us an opportunity. And so Sport5 will then approach clients, West Ham, Manchester United, whoever it might be, and will attempt to connect both sides of that party. You'll notice down there in the bottom right-hand corner, I say it's a communications medium. Sponsorship research is really interesting. In fact, the sponsorship profession in general is really interesting because, believe it or not, there is no scientific evidence to tangibly prove that there's a direct link between sponsorship and sales. So I'm guessing that most of you have never actually thought, wow, there's a sponsor. I'm going to rush out now and buy it. What sponsorship is particularly effective at doing, and what most people in sport and most people in marketing will look at sponsorship as being, is it's a way of communicating. How are these deals done? Well, I've already mentioned Sport5, but in essence, deals between the sponsor and the sponsee, or between the rights owner and the individual or the company or the entity that is trying to acquire the right of association with those rights. Sitting in the middle of them will be an agency. So I've already outlined the case for you. A betting company wants an opportunity, enlists the help, pays them to go and find an entity with which to associate. But it works the other way too. So UEFA or United or whoever else it might be could go to an agency and say, find us a betting partner. They will pay for this, obviously, it's a service. But in terms of the complexity that Agnes mentioned earlier, there are going to be people sat in these agencies and they've got to hit their numbers, right? They've got to hit their numbers. So they've got to sell. They've got to buy and sell. So they don't care. They don't care about the gambling harms. They don't care about who is impacted about this. The people sat at their desks day in, day out are being assessed according to what they buy and sell. They've got to hit their numbers. So when we're looking at how you regulate gambling and how you introduce regulations into an industrial sector, it's not just the club and the sponsor, it's also the people in the middle who are buying and selling these deals. In terms of how sponsorships work, and we go back to the point I made about communications medium, it's about getting you to think about things, and in that box inside your head that processes information. Betano, associated with UEFA, UEFA, the governing body of European football, they're kind of responsible, and they've got some kudos and legitimacy, and so that's okay. So this kind of cognitive behavioural message that or process that underpins sponsorship is really, really important. Just as a kind of related aside, a beer brand that historically has been associated with sponsorships, when I talk to them about how do you measure the effectiveness of your sponsorship deal, they had 540 different metrics to try and understand the cognitive behavioural impact of sponsorships. It's complex. Now, when you buy a sponsorship deal, you buy this. So the logo on the shirt. So you might, as a sponsor, as a gambling platform, as a bookmaker, whatever else it might be, you might be able to pay $1 million a season if you're lucky. It might be 5 million in the Premier League. Certainly for some of the bigger clubs across European football, it will be more, 10 million maybe, 10 million a season. But keep in mind, 24/7, 365 across the world, it's pretty good value for money. But arguably the biggest and most important part of a sponsorship deal is once you've acquired the rights of association, so you're acquiring the legal rights of association, but what comes next is more significant. It is the activation. I always liken this. You can buy a Ferrari, so in other words, you can buy your right of association with Manchester City, let's say. You can buy the Ferrari, but then you've got to fill it with fuel. Activation is the fuel. the rule of thumb for many sponsorship professionals is for every £1 that you spend on contract, so on buying the right of association, you would spend £2 bringing the sponsorship to life. In some cases, some sponsorship professionals would say, it doesn't matter what you spend, you've got to make the deal come to life. And so this is all of those things that you see, like TV adverts, competitions, corporate hospitality, and so on and so forth. This is activation. And this is the part that really brings the sponsorship to life. So that's what a sponsorship is. What kind of views of sponsorship do sponsors take? I use this slide specifically. Bet365, the Coates family. And some of you may know the Coates family. Born and raised in Stoke-on-Trent. Part of the community. They even make contributions to the local university. So there is a Coates business school in a local university. So they're deeply embedded in the community. So you are still seeing, in this hyper-industrialized 21st century world, philanthropy. And so Bet365, local Stoke brand, sponsoring Stoke City, local club, not just the men's team, the women's team as well. And so there is this philanthropic approach to sponsorship. You've got a transactional approach to sponsorship. We've paid the money, we put the name on the shirt, and that's it. End of story. So it's a very kind of bilateral, not particularly complicated. You give us money, you put your name, that's it. End of story. We see more relational strategies developing, particularly amongst bigger clubs, and that sometimes links to networks of partners. So, of course, for those of you who are familiar with football right now, you'll know there are franchise clubs with clubs in different territories across the world. Relationships and networks are about mutually delivering value. We help you, you help us. Promote our club across the world, we'll promote your gambling services across the world. So there's this much deeper, more meaningful relationship emerges. The final one is arguably the more, I'll use the word sinister, because what we're now beginning to see is obviously gaming and gambling, particularly on mobile devices, is part of the game experience. And you know it. You go to a game, sometimes you're watching the game, sometimes you might drink a little beer, sometimes you might put a bet on, and so it's gambling is being incorporated into the overall experience. It's what people expect, certainly some people expect. So why do clubs do this? Well, essentially, it's money. And that's just, I thought, how can I illustrate this point appropriately? I thought, check out what Erling Haaland. So if Erling Haaland hits his numbers, which I guess he kind of does on a fairly regular basis, he gets paid £850,000 per week. An alternative way of putting this is that there is an economic imperative, not just inside football clubs, but inside many sport organisations, to cover their costs. And clearly one of the biggest costs that many football clubs have are labour costs. What sponsors get in return are the following things: brand awareness, brand recall, image transfer, media exposure, experiential benefits. UEFA, in signing deals with partners, Just Eat, Hisense, Betano, their sponsorship partners, their commercial partners are part of the experience, help enhance the experience that they provide to their viewers and consumers. So don't cut me off yet. Okay, don't cut me off yet. Okay, don't cut me off. I've got 3 slides. Don't cut me off. Okay. So what I would say first is legitimacy and normalization. And I thought this was a particularly interesting one. And many of us will know Eric Cantona, French, alternative, poet, actor, raconteur, prone to making very controversial statements that challenge. So he's a bit of a kind of I think he's a bit of a working class football fan hero, but he's also the delight of Guardian reading liberals. And so what you do is you normalise by associating with him. I actually found this quite shocking that someone of his stature and his reputation, but of course there's money involved in this kind of thing, they will have paid him. But nevertheless, this serves to legitimise and normalise. And I would invite you to think about when you see Ray Winston, or you see groups of former professional footballers talking in podcasts created by gambling platforms. This is part of this legitimisation and normalisation process. There's also the issue of humour and subversion, of which the prime exponent is Paddy Power. This is real. Several years ago, Paddy Power, in an attempt to perhaps subvert or perhaps just to draw attention to it, is to change the Huddersfield Town shirt. One thing, just so people know, there are regulations about what you can and can't do with a logo on a shirt. Logo size is regulated. The final one, and then I will conclude, I promise, or maybe not, is white labelling and organised crime. There's a great Norwegian football magazine called Josimar. If you want to know more about 8xBet, and particularly its relationship with Manchester City, read Josimar, Google it, and you'll find the Josimar 8xBet. 8xBet is a white label gambling platform. A white label gambling platform is essentially, there is a central hub, and you buy the right to be associated with their service. So 8xBet has bought the right to be associated with this service. Now a commercial partner of Manchester City. But Josimar's allegation is that the provider of the white label gambling service in the Far East is associated with organised crime. So this is not just a commercial, we've got a product, we're going to sell it, try to make as much money as possible. There is something much more deeply, deeply sinister than that. I will finish. So to conclude, it's complicated. It involves an ecosystem. It's a cognitive behavioural process. There are issues around subversion and humour and legitimisation, but there are also connections to organised crime too. So, Agnes, you're right. It's complicated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon, for that fascinating talk. It was great to hear your view on why such sponsorship deals can be such an issue, particularly in relation to gambling harms. So, time now to pass over to our excellent panel. And keeping in with theme of football and sponsorship, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Maria Moxey from the University of Bristol. And Maria, are going to be talking more about your work on the prevalence of gambling marketing in the Premier League.
So thanks everyone. So I'm going to be talking about two key studies that we've been working on at the University of Bristol as part of a team. And so the first one is that we were interested in understanding the prevalence of gambling marketing across the opening weekend of the Premier League. And so put simply, we essentially counted the amount of logos that you could see and also the amount of kind of references to gambling marketing that you could hear across the opening weekend. And we did this across 4 key platforms. So it was the 6 televised matches that you could see across the opening weekend, including the pre- and post-match discussions, as well as TalkSport Radio, Sky Sports News and social media. What were the main findings? Well, in 2023, we conducted this study and we found just under 11,000 gambling adverts. We used exactly the same measures, exactly the same approaches, and we conducted the same study again in 2024, and we found just under 30,000 adverts. So this trebled in just 1 year. So we were kind of interested in understanding this in the context of regulation, so gambling in football, gambling marketing in football at the moment is completely self-regulated. And so there are 3 key kind of voluntary measures that are in place. that we were interested in kind of looking at in a little bit more detail in the context of our findings. So the first is the whistle-to-whistle ban. So this is where for 5 minutes before and after kickoff, televised commercials are not permitted before 9 p.m. But we found that actually over 10,000 gambling ads were observed during that whistle-to-whistle ban, demonstrating that this kind of self-regulation measure just isn't going far enough. And this is because we know that, and I've got this image here, blurry, but demonstrating that the ads are not just limited to televised commercials, they are all over the kind of the pitch side, as well as on player kits, as well as kind of social media, radio, and etc. And so so we know that this regulation isn't going far enough. The second is the front of shirt ban that's coming into effect next season, and this is where clubs in the Premier League have agreed to not have their logos on the front of shirt. However, again, this regulation isn't going far enough to actually reduce the amount of gambling marketing that people are being exposed to, and this is because we found that actually front of shirt marketing only accounts for about 8% of the total amount across the weekend. So again, this just isn't going far enough to actually reduce exposure to gambling marketing. And then the third is the voluntary code of conduct. And this is where leagues have signed up to this, to agree to this voluntary code of conduct, which again is intended to reduce exposure to gambling marketing. But we know from the figures I've already said, nearly 30,000 gambling logos that people are being exposed to, this code isn't working. And in particular, it's quite ambiguous. So, for example, it uses language like a reasonable and proportionate portion of ads should be accompanied by responsible gambling. Well, what is a reasonable proportion? We found that actually under a fifth of ads were accompanied by responsible gambling, so arguably not necessarily a reasonable portion. So really just demonstrating that these self-regulatory measures aren't going far enough to actually reduce the amount of gambling marketing that football supporters are being exposed to. So what is the kind of issue with this? Why does it matter? Well, the gambling marketing has this potential to have a normalising impact that Simon's already alluded to. And so this kind of, the issue is that it sends a message to children and adults that gambling is a normal part of football. And this brings me to the second study that we've been conducting, which is looking at the way in which gambling is a part of grassroots football culture. And so we looked at this level because grassroots footballers make up a large proportion of people who regularly consume and watch football. And so we conducted surveys and interviews, 269 surveys and 39 interviews. And it was clear in the interviews that actually this normalising, this potential for the normalising impact is really, really clear. So participants were saying things like, for example, you think of football, you think of betting, they just go hand in hand. Or one participant said, football and gambling, they go together like eggs and bacon. So really just highlighting how kind of intertwined and interconnected these two industries have become. And largely the participants attributed this to gambling marketing. And what was quite interesting is that even participants who regularly bet and engage in gambling and engage in football consumption, even they have a real distaste for the amount of advertisement and marketing that's going on. So, for example, one participant said, you know, I can't bear the adverts. Before the match has even started, you're completely bombarded by gambling adverts. I can't bear it. And so really just highlighting that even participants who regularly bet, they don't want to see the amount of adverts that are taking place. And largely this is because it is really kind of interconnecting these two industries. So kind of what is our main kind of outcome, and what are we calling for? Well, we want to, we're calling for government intervention to tighten regulations around gambling marketing to help to reduce the amount of marketing that football supporters are being exposed to. So, for example, we want to see a comprehensive whistle-to-whistle ban that includes all gambling marketing. So, for example, the logos that you see around the pitch side, as well as obviously the television commercials, as well as front of shirt. So a comprehensive whistle-to-whistle ban, and also a mandated safer gambling messaging. So after the 9 p.m, if you do see gambling marketing, it's accompanied by safer gambling marketing that's raising awareness and educating around the potential harms of gambling. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that important insight on the volume of gambling marketing in the Premier League and why we need more effective regulation. Excuse me. So while football and gambling have become very closely related, there is also a need to explore the relationship between cricket and gambling, which is also growing. And to talk us through this, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Carolyn Plateau from Loughborough University, who's going to talk about the landscape and the next steps for research in gambling in cricket.
Thanks, Jamie. Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today at the colloquium. It's a pleasure to speak. As Jamie said, I'm going to switch tack slightly and focus on gambling within the context of cricket. I'm a psychologist by trade, so the work that we've done within this space has come from predominantly a mental health and well-being lens, with a focus particularly on elite players. It's worth saying off the bat that gambling harms among cricket players is not a particularly well-researched area. Very few studies have investigated cricketers specifically. Many studies have only included very small samples of cricket players in and amongst many other different types of sports. So the data in this area is sparse in terms of understanding both the nature of gambling and the impact of gambling harms on players and other key stakeholders. However, you've probably seen in the news some high-profile players have recently disclosed difficulties with gambling in recent years. For example, Bryden Cast was sanctioned this year by the cricket regulator for betting over 300 times on his own sport. Others include Patrick Foster and Chris Wood, who've also disclosed difficulties with gambling in recent years. Chris describes how gambling was a constant presence and a means of managing his emotions that was connected to his relative success or failure in cricket. In combination with some of this anecdotal evidence, the research evidence does, at least to date, suggest that male cricketers in particular may be at an increased risk of gambling harms. It's worth saying that there are very few studies that have investigated female cricketers. There are various theories as to why cricketers may be at a greater risk of gambling harms, but a unique combination of individual, interpersonal and wider environmental factors within cricket are likely to play a part. From an individual perspective, we know that broadly, in terms of the elite athlete sphere, being an elite athlete is linked with greater risk of gambling harms. Surveys from the collegiate system in the US have pointed to relatively high levels of sports betting in elite male athletes, despite this being banned within their systems. Research also suggests high levels of sensation seeking and lower impulse control among elite male athlete populations. In cricket specifically, there's a perception that gambling cultures and associated harms are common among players and other key stakeholders. Chris Wood describes being in a culture within his environment, his cricket environment, where gambling is endorsed or encouraged, and how this can set a precedence for gambling behaviours. So I'm going to hopefully play a little clip of Chris talking about that on a recent podcast.
I think in change rooms as a whole, gambling now is certainly more rife than it ever was when I was growing up, but it was certainly still there. A lot of the senior guys went to casinos, bet on football, bet on horse racing, and a lot of people are always vocally talking about it in the changing room, and that was me for a long time. Before I kind of knew I had a problem and reached out, I was very much that guy in the change room that was talking about the bets that I was winning, all this money I was winning, giving people tips. And I'd say everyone in a changing room environment now, up to maybe 5% of people bet to some kind of extent.
The suggestions for the relative lure of gambling behaviours within this context are related to the comparatively high level of disposable income that young professional cricketers have in comparison to their peers, perhaps similar to what we see within the football context that we've spoken about already. Furthermore, cricketers are required to navigate long periods of downtime and social isolation when travelling, when facing rain delays, and in long matches. Gambling may be seen as a healthier pastime, perhaps, than alcohol or drugs in these situations. From a wider environmental perspective, betting is inherent to the sport. Betting companies form major sponsors of many cricket clubs, counties and franchises. Indeed, in some cases, betting companies are the only ways in which such organisations can continue to exist. Very few have the option to turn down a major sponsor, even if it is a sponsor, that sponsor is a betting organisation. Some emerging threats to the game that may increase the risk of gambling harms both to players, key stakeholders and fans worldwide have been noted, including the explosion of different cricket formats and leagues all over the world, including franchise cricket, Legends cricket, the European Cricket League, just to name a few. Whilst providing players with a greater number of opportunities to play in different formats, which comes with its own challenges given the hectic schedules that this often creates, the more cynical amongst us may suggest that these different forms of cricket provide yet further opportunities for gambling, corruption and illegal activity, fueling betting markets in countries all over the world, even where gambling is banned. The relatively recent emergence of fantasy cricket is arguably a form of gambling with the opportunity to win cash prizes. Indeed, the fantasy sport company Dream11 is a key sponsor of the 100. Given the extent and scale of betting occurring both domestically and worldwide, over $2 billion was bet on domestic cricket competitions in 2023. Corruption or inducements to get players involved with organised crime groups are a particular concern for the sport. For example, about sharing information on games, match and spot fixing. Players may also face issues around blackmail and extortion. Corruption within cricket in the UK comes under the remit of the cricket regulator, which has only been established in the last 12 months. And they work collaboratively with the Professional Cricketers Association to support players who may be experiencing gambling-related harms. Given the right combination of individual, interpersonal, environmental risk factors that the cricket context presents, there's an urgent need for further research into gambling harms. Our recent Bristol Hub funded project brought together key stakeholders from across the academic, cricket, charitable and clinical sectors to discuss the impact of gambling harms within cricket and to identify and prioritise some of the next steps for research in this space. The group acknowledged a lack of robust evidence in this space and set out some suggestions for what these next steps might need to look like. I have a poster at the event today which provides more detail on what my team did, but the immediate research priorities identified by the expert group via a Delphi study included the following. Understanding the key risk factors and trajectories for gambling concerns and harms within cricketers, so understanding a little bit more about who's at risk and what gambling harms look like within this setting. Exploring the barriers and facilitators to cricketers who, when it comes to seeking support around gambling, so understanding what might be some of the limitations in the current support systems. Examining the impact of educational programs for both players and staff on the prevention of gambling harms within cricket. Many such programs currently exist, but what works for whom in terms of kind of prevention and increasing support-seeking behaviours is still relatively unclear. Understanding the gambling experience and support specifically in women's cricket around both professional and amateur levels, because research within female cricketers is very sparse. And then understanding the impact of advertising and sponsorship within cricket on gambling behaviours and harms among players and fans, which obviously connects closely to some of the things that we've already heard about this morning. I won't say too much more about this, but other than these seem like really good places to start in terms of trying to move the field forward in understanding and eliciting change within the cricket context to try to reduce gambling harms for all those who love the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that valuable and important discussion on what needs to happen next in terms of gambling harms research in cricket. So now, just as gambling is digitally transformed in recent years, so has sports itself, and as we all know, this involves the growth of esports, an ever-growing sector which captures the imagination of so many. And therefore, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Tobias Schultz from the University of Agder in Norway, who's going to be talking about esports and gambling, a risky game in the digital arena.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Does it work? Yeah, perfect. Thank you for the invitation, and I really love your point about blurred lines. Esports is like the definition of blurred lines. Everything is blurred. And that makes it also quite interesting hearing what you were presenting, where if you think about esports, it is plural. So you have a lot of sports. You have FIFA, or now called EAFC, you have Counter-Strike, you have League of Legends, and a million of other games. So technically you have a million of ecosystems. And that's what quite fascinating is when I was preparing it and what you were presenting. So for the idea, what you were presenting about FIFA and UEFA and football, this is EAFC. What you were presenting with cricket, that is Counter-Strike. And you have all those dimensions, and all of them are purely self-regulated because most of the governments, let's be frank, I'm in this industry for 25 years, they don't care about it. And this is a huge risk because it's completely self-regulated. And we had that issue when COVID came, where suddenly no people were able to bet on anything. Everybody betted on esports. And that has long-term effects not only on Gambling Harms, but also for the industry, because suddenly there was a surge of money going in. All of those sponsors you were mentioning, all of them are in esports in some or the other capacity. And suddenly all of those teams got a lot of money, which is wonderful. Then suddenly football started playing again, and American football as well. You presented so many numbers. They were gone. So suddenly all of those teams evaporated. And suddenly there was a huge risk of match fixing and all of those topics, because to be frank, what Erling Haaland is getting, none of esports players are even close to it. It's probably what he is getting in a week is what they are getting for their whole career. And this means a huge risk of getting in there. But what I want to make clear, gaming is not gambling. I know a lot of politics and a lot of associations are bringing that together, but video games are the biggest entertainment industry we have currently. So you cannot say that video games are gambling, but they are really good in developing gambling mechanics. I mean, there are a couple of presentations on loot boxes and everything. So it is this part where we see this huge issue where a lot of good can come out of video games. It is a wonderful tool to train, to teach and everything, but a lot of dark side is in there as well. And it is a digital phenomenon. So you can do it. You can create a betting agency quite easily, and it's an international phenomenon. You can bet on Australian Counter-Strike. And we saw it in COVID, people who had no idea about Counter-Strike. I had this one example of a former Counter-Strike professional. His father didn't care at all about his career. COVID happened, his father called, tell me everything about Counter-Strike, I want to bet on Virtus Pro. And this is the irony we see there. But what the interesting part is, and that's why it's quite interesting what you were presenting, we have self-regulation in there. But it is the decision of the publisher who is publishing the game, who is creating those leagues. So we have those extremes, like in Counter-Strike, Valve Software is developing it. It is a fascinating case because it's probably the only case where we see actually laissez-faire regulation. So we don't care. Their whole mantra is, if you have 5 friends, you can win the championship. So it's completely inclusive. Everybody can play in there. And it is a shooter. So there are a lot of stereotypes about that. So that means suddenly all of those sponsors are either Betway and all of those. You have military in there. You have all of those who are normally not able to sponsor anything are sponsoring Counter-Strike. Then you have League of Legends, Riot Games. They are this company who tries to have clean esports, completely clean. So no betting agencies, no tobacco, no, alcohol, now is entering, but their idea is we don't want to have those things, which still means there is betting on it because it's digital, you have all the data, you have everything, and to be frank, it is still a small company compared to, I mean, Manchester City is still bigger than Riot Games. So they have no chance to fight against that. And still they are criticized by all the governments to do something. And this is this part where esports is driven to be a business model. And Electronic Arts made it their mission to make a business model out of loot boxes, where if you play EAFC, you have to pay to actually be good. So it's quite ironic. It is actually quite fitting that they worked with FIFA, even though they are no longer working with FIFA anymore. But that's the part which is where we see there is this whole part where if there is no regulation by any governmental agency, we will have those dark spots where we cannot do anything. And even the idea of teaching kids in an early age, what does that mean? How can we deal with that? So they are naturally completely unprepared. I mean, the good part about traditional sports is they get some coaching. But we see it in esports where there's this 16-year-old kid, played good, next day in front of tens of thousands of people in an arena, and yeah, be frank, no preparation at all. And suddenly those sponsors are coming and are promising money, and suddenly we are in organized crime and everything. And that is the part where, from a research perspective, understanding how this works in esports, as well as it is smaller ecosystems, trying solutions, trying to work with it, can be immediately translated into any other field. So if something is working in esports, it will work in cricket, it will work in football, it will work in American football. And that's the important part I wanted to translate to you, especially now with the Olympic esports games. We have something where we can try new ideas and find solutions for, I mean, you presented numbers and you as well, a huge market which is currently uncontrolled. And therefore, look at esports as a future lab, even with the bad sides. Thank you.